Hello, everyone, and welcome to Accessibility News, where Tracy Delisle and myself talk about accessibility. We have guests that join us to talk about different topics. Tracy, would you like to introduce yourself and kind of tell people a little bit about your background?
Yes, I am with Certified Access Services, and we inspect businesses for accessibility. We identify any violations they may have. We create a great report so that they can create a plan to bring their business up to compliance. We also educate the community as well as businesses about the need and the importance of bringing their business into accessibility and hoping to increase some of their revenue reaching out to those groups.
Awesome. For those of you who don't know, my name is Glenn Ingram. I own a company called Web Search Pros, where we focus on and specialize in accessible websites. So making sure that websites work for people that have vision issues, hearing issues, have issues with their hands, maybe they can't use a mouse, have cognitive issues, or are sensitive to movement on a website, like people with epilepsy. So we just try and make sure that websites work for everyone. So we have a goal of trying to have an internet for all at some point. So Tracy, what is new? Well, our guest looks like they're having some technical difficulty. They keep logging in and getting kicked out. So while we're doing that, is anything new or what's happening in your world this week?
Actually, some great things. You know, we are getting a lot of great feedback from the state that there really is a great push to let people keep those parklets and temporary spaces that they've had up. They want to keep them up for permanent, and I think that that's great. There are going to be three components that the different jurisdictions are going to be looking for. One is going to be fire. So people would need, all businesses would need to know if they have those parklets or temporary structures, that they need to have no smoking signs and a fire extinguisher out there. The other is structural. So if you actually created a structure when the temporary mandate came out to have a dining outside, then they want to make sure that it's structurally sound and that they actually do file for the permits now. That's going to be one of the requirements to be able to keep it out for 2 years. And the other is accessibility. So as you know, people kind of threw them up, and so they're forgetting to do 5% of the seating to be accessible. A lot of them put in umbrellas that were low. The access, they put in steps to step up into this temporary structure, or they didn't think about stepping down into a curb. So a lot of jurisdictions are providing ramps. So recently, I would say that the great news is that everybody seems to be good with keeping them out for 2 years, which is great because we'll be able to get some more revenue to those businesses. You know, a lot of restaurants and places like that, it's all about butts in the seat. So how many you can turn and burn in there is, you know, more money that you're going to make. So we need to increase that revenue for them. But yeah, those are the three things that are going to be required to keep those structures out there. And if not, then you will see some people will need to remove them and put them away. The other great thing is it will trigger is that, you know, now the city's going to be there. They're going to want to make sure that your inside is also compliant. So I think in 2022, we're going to see a big push that more and more are going to be proactive about bringing their businesses into compliance, just by nature of that they've really had to take a look at their business because of those structures. So I'm excited about that because, you know, we preach that all the time, and it will definitely roll into the questions about web accessibility, which is your arena. So, yeah. What about you?
What's, I think, going to be coming more paramount as more information comes out, our friends over at Google announced in November a user experience algorithm update. So a lot of it that's being talked about quite a bit is speed of websites, security of websites, but there's also parts of it that are talking about alt tags, and I think it's leading into other accessibility features and functions. So it's going to be very interesting as we go through this summer, and they start what they've done. If it's similar to what they did 3 years ago with mobile first indexing, by the end of summer, if websites weren't built properly for cell phones and mobile devices, they weren't on the first page of Google anymore. It's going to be interesting to see at the end of the summer if sites that are not accessible, how visible are they? So
wow.
Yeah, I think
like I'm sorry. It sounds like they're feeling the heat, and that's going to happen. I'm sure a lot of people are talking to Google and saying, "Hey, why isn't this working?" For those of us, Glenn, that aren't really tech savvy, when you say alt tags, what's that mean?
that means every image on a website needs to have a word picture, so a description of that image. So if someone that can't see, they can still have somewhat of a similar experience on a website by having it spoken to them on their screen reader. This is a picture of an image of, and just a description of it.
Well, that's certainly right up your alley. So that's definitely regarding accessibility. So,
Yes.
wow. I mean, at some point, if it's not now, it's going to get you at some point, right? I mean, people really need to pay attention to this. If they don't get, better to find out that way, and that you're not at the top of the page than to get sued for it, because those are not cheap right now.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. And it seems like with the lawsuits with accessibility, we're seeing a big emphasis on e-commerce stores. I think for a couple of reasons, just because it's pretty difficult for a lot of the platforms to make them accessible. And I think they're looking at this as larger businesses, even though a lot of times it's people just like ourselves that own these e-commerce stores. But these lawsuits are, I've seen a lot of settlements starting asking for $40,000, $50,000. So a lot more than we're seeing the mom and pop restaurants settle for 10, 12,000. So it's interesting, and people that are selling stuff online definitely need to take this seriously.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Tracy. Well, we have an amazing guest today. His name is Max Lieberman, and Max is going to talk to us about some learning disabilities, some things that they're offering. So let's bring Max on live and visit with him and learn a little bit more about Max.
All right.
Max, hi, how are you?
Hi, Glenn. Hi, Tracy. How are you both doing today?
Great, thank you.
Yes, amazing. Well, Max, thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time and being open and vulnerable to kind of talk about things. If you wouldn't mind kind of sharing the story, kind of like what you shared with me earlier this week about kind of what prompted you from a previous employer to be where you're at now, and kind of the circumstances that surrounded the conversations you had with that employer.
Yeah, of course. I came back from France in 2019, and I was looking for work, and I found a job being a customer service representative, and I didn't disclose during the interview that I had a learning disability, because I was previously just not being hired or making it through the interview to the next rounds. And I thought, okay, maybe it has something to do with that. So I want to see how it goes and not disclose, because it's something's not working right now. And I got the job. So I went in, we had an interview, I did a trial one, a weekend, perfect. Then the next week comes, after supposed to being 2 weeks and still in the training period, he brings me into his office and he says to me, we need to chat. I'm like, okay. He's like, you ask too many questions, you're annoying, and I want to fire you. And I sat there, I'm like, okay, I have a learning disability. This is why I'm asking a lot of these questions. I know some of them might be repetitive, but this is how I'm learning. And he's like, why didn't you tell me during the interview? I'm like, well, I had previous bad experiences with previous employers that when I did disclose, I wasn't accommodated. So I keep it to myself. And if I need help, I will obviously ask for it. He's like, well, it's 2019. Everyone has a learning disability. So he was kind of placing me in a box where everyone just has it. Where no, everyone experiences it differently, and I experienced my own learning disability differently than someone else would when they experience their own learning disability or any other disability they may have. So I know he was trying to be empathetic in some ways when he meant that, but it didn't necessarily help in that situation, because it just made me feel like, oh, you're not being so supportive. And he said to me afterwards, do you have a plan? And most people who live with a learning disability or have this little bit of disability in general understand the importance of how they navigate their own world, because the world's not been meant to be meant for them. So there's different trips and techniques that they know that works for them, that makes them be able to interact with their own environment. And he didn't seem to understand that. I know that came from another place where he's trying to learn, but it immediately right then and there made me feel like, okay, you don't think I'm thinking what works for me. I do have a plan, and I know what makes me be able to be successful. I just need your support and help. And when I heard that, I knew right then and there I wasn't going to be working there anytime soon, continuing on to work, obviously. And I felt at the same time I had to do something, because I must not be the only one who lives with a disability who experiences something similar on a daily basis.
Len.
Sorry, I was muting while I was getting everything working social media. Can you maybe go into a little bit of details about some of these different ways of learning? The reason I'm asking about this is I kind of came across when I was doing some coaching and training for a large corporation in the past that some people can learn by instruction. Some people are what they term visual learners, so they need to kind of see some on-the-job training and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what you see in the past and kind of what type of training and stuff like that works for you, Max?
Yeah, for me, I've always been an auditory learner. If you really are descriptive and show me where to do something and not be vague, I can get that done. And then it's the visualization. So if you say, Max, go to the corner of the right-hand corner of the house and pick up the pot. Like, okay, the pot plant. And I'm like, okay, I can pick up the pot carrier and bring it over. But where would you want it? If you just say, go pick it up, what do I do? So some people need to be given more direction in that sense. So be very elaborate with the directions to me and be precise. But then if you're giving me a lot of directions, have it written down so I can read it and I will remember it. Because if you give me a lot of tasks quickly and in rapid succession, I'm not going to remember them all right away. And I'd rather have it for reference. And it helps also break down the steps of doing a very complex task for me, because I can see what the ultimate goal is, which is easy for me to see. But the hard thing for me to see is the small linear tasks to get to the final objective.
You know, this is a great subject, and I didn't realize that this was the disability today that we were going to be talking about. My son has this same disability. So he had his audio visual processing issue that we identified when he was in 4th grade. And, you know, the first time that I really knew that there was a problem, and I used to do exactly what you're saying. I'd say, you know, go upstairs, you need to clean your room. And I'd give him a repetitive group, and he would get upstairs and he would say, what am I supposed to do? And I was like, well, first thing you gotta do is listen to me. And I didn't realize at that point, I thought he was just, you know, kind of being a kid, but I didn't realize that he was trying so hard to process it. By the time he got up there to the top of the stairs where his bedroom was, he had no idea what to do. And it increased his anxiety so much that all thoughts were gone. And so when he went into therapy, and we had him tested and those things, and he learned some tools today on how to ask those things. But I had to learn as well, because I didn't, when I communicate with him and when I communicate with his brother, it's just a different style. But once I got it, then I realized that it was about giving him the tools to succeed. And I think that that's really, and he's very successful, and he finished college, and but we did have to have an IEP in place. And when he got to college, the way that he learned was different. So all of the recordings of the lectures, he could record, and they don't typically let you do that unless it's a permission, so that he could re-listen to it back at his pace. And he took a little bit of time. And so when you said you came from France, did you grow up in France?
No, I was actually in 2019. I went there for work, actually, because I was trouble finding work in Toronto, and I wanted to live in France because I was enjoying the lifestyle there and just enjoying the camaraderie I had with some friends there who I met on exchange when I was in university. and I wanted to get a new experience because I wasn't getting anything here. I needed to get out of the funk, so to speak, where I would have an opportunity to make something of myself, and that's what drove me to go to France.
Now, you shouldn't say that, Max, because I have a daughter that did exchange over there, and she keeps threatening to go back. So let's not talk about that too much.
Fair enough.
That's right. Well, what have you done since? So it sounds like you didn't stay at that job. What did you do? What did you do after that? And what are you doing today?
I did some soul searching. I knew when I left that company that I needed to find work, and I was feeling pressure from family and friends, like, oh, you gotta find work, gotta find it quickly. But when I left, it was the middle of November of 2019. This is right before the pandemic, and no one's really hiring at the end of November to December, and it just led into January. And then the pandemic really hit, so I had a lot of time to think things through, and I ended up starting my own business called Liebs&Co. Because of my experiences living with a learning disability and not being accommodated, but also from my experiences realizing how important education is. And I was inspired by both of those two to start Liebs&Co.
So what's Liebs&Co? What does that do, Max?
We educate employers and their employees about disabilities through online interactive educational programs so that they can create a more inclusive and empathetic workplace for all people.
That's awesome.
Fantastic. So are you primarily working with HR companies? Who are you, where are you reaching or throwing out that net to so that they can understand the need for your services?
We go B2B, and we focus on any small, medium to large corporation. Obviously, HR is included in there. Any company that wants to learn, not only learn more about how they can be more inclusive, but also just really embed it into their culture. Because as has been shown, when you're, as you mentioned, as you mentioned earlier, by making your sites more accessible, you're gaining more of a customer service base that will draw in people from the disability community. And in Canada, they have over 25 billion disposable income. So if you really want to include people with disabilities in your workplace and integrate this stuff, you're going to also get people and draw people from that community who will be willing to buy your product because it's not only accessible to them, but it's easy to use for them as well.
Yeah, in California, they have, and I don't know if you know this, Glenn, but you may, that if you hire someone with a disability, you can get a lot of tax benefits. Mm-hmm. The federal specifically will offset some of the taxes when you hire a disabled person. So that's something that if you don't have that in your informationals, you definitely want to add that because there are a lot of great incentives to do that. And yeah, it definitely goes along with what we do, Glenn. Getting out there and teaching the community. And, everybody always thinks of ADA and disabled as someone in a wheelchair, but it's so much bigger than that. This is a perfect example, Max.
Exactly. And I have my own problems identify with myself as being disabled because how society perceives people who are disabled. They perceive someone either being in a wheelchair or visually being disabled as the go-to, but there's so many more. It's experienced so differently between different people who have a disability, and I never associated with that because I didn't feel I fit that group. But until I came to terms with my own disability, I realized now that I am, and I feel comfortable being part of that community because we understand that some of us face similar barriers, and we understand the barriers that we face together because society wasn't really meant for us.
Max, I'd like to kind of ask you about, some of the struggles you deal with on day-to-day life, because part of the reason that Tracy and I do this show is just so the people that have things that we take for granted because we don't have, a disability, whether it be learning, cognitive, walking in a wheelchair and stuff like this, can kind of understand. So, kind of like, let's walk a few steps in your shoes. What type of struggles do you deal with from a day-to-day with a learning disability?
So one of my toughest is putting my thoughts on the paper. Writing is one of the worst things. I have it all in my head how I want to say it and how I want to write it. But when I take my thoughts and process it and put it to the paper, it comes out not as strong and not as well. And I always need it to be edited because I don't sound how I talk. I sound either younger or not as mature in my writing, and it doesn't flow well because I have difficulties just processing the right words and putting them on the paper and finding the different adjectives or grammar that would make it sound beautiful. And it caused me to make a lot of mistakes. Like, I typically always make mistakes between there, and there, two, and two. Any of those conjugation words, like similar to there, and there, or two and two, and it's very stressful. So you would notice that I'll send you a voice note instead because I can clearly articulate what I want to portray to you faster, easier, and I'm not worried about not only making a spelling error, but I'm spending less time. For me to send a text message takes me sometimes 20 minutes if it's really in depth. Something like where I just say sounds good, or like how I had I thought I was jumping in on the call a bit too early, so that's why I left. That takes me 2 seconds because I already thought it through, and it's quick and simple. But if it's really in depth and needs to be well thought out, like anything in sales or anything in just an in-depth conversation, it takes me a while. It really does, and I struggle with that. And then you throw in the fast paced environments where they're throwing a lot of information at me. Events is one of them. I have to really focus and use my memory retention, and that limits me from being involved with any social interactions or any other that jazz, because all my efforts and energy is focused on retaining what needs to get done. And if I forget something, I always would ask for reinsurance, so I would get in trouble about that. That was my way of ensuring that I didn't forget anything, because I wasn't given, a broken down list of what to do during that day when I asked for it. Or the last thing is really just processing it. Sometimes when we're in the lecture and I had to take notes, I would have to go at a fast pace and solely focus on what's going on, because I would not be able to retain the information if I wasn't paying attention fully. So they made sure that I had a note taker, because I can miss information really quickly and not be able to have the full notes in front of me. So that's why I've always needed that, because it's part of it's part of what I have, my learning disability and my dysgraphia. Because when I would write out my notes, I can't read my handwriting. So there's a bunch of it just all tied in.
I think I may have a learning disability because that kind of matches me. I mean, for quite a while, I've used Google Docs because I could dictate to it, which is better than when I try and send text messages, because that darn Siri just doesn't understand me.
It's so tough, and I don't like Siri does amazing things, but it's tough for me because my voice sometimes isn't clear enough, and the words get all mangled or mismanaged, so I'll say.
Yeah, I was talking to Kyle, and he said that when there's a delay in his thought process and he's trying to do Siri, that it gets all messed up because his delay of getting that thought out. So it's only a half. So Siri has no idea what he really is asking. So I think that I'm so glad that you're with us today, because there's so many, like Lynn said, I do some of these things as well. And I don't think that people realize how many people have a disability. It's not as if you have a big D on your forehead, right? I mean, how do people know? And the unfortunate thing that I think that happens with people that have this sort of disability is that they fear. And so you'll see them kind of, pull back and not want to be a part of a community that they think that they don't fit in, when in reality they absolutely fit in, and they may not even realize there's quite a few people within that same group that have it. I know as my son started talking more and more to his friends about it, that they're, yeah, I have that too. I just never really talked about it. And as he started to talk about it more and more, he realized more and more of his friends had it. They just didn't talk about it to each other. But once he started bringing that up, his community grew big, and you can support each other. And good people, whether they have a disability or not, will accept you and understand that you learn and you communicate differently, and that's okay. You know, we're all brought up to have one way to communicate. They're only teaching, you know, back when I was in school, they were teaching one way. Well, that worked for me, but I think if my son had grown up or you had grown up in that time, how difficult that must have been, because it must have been so confusing that you're just getting pieces of the information to learn. So you're getting like 25% of that would be very difficult. So I am, you know, so appreciate you coming on and talking about it, and hoping that if we can just get through to one person that has the this sort of disability, to know that it's okay to talk about, and that there is a huge support group out there for them.
100%. That's always the goal, is to make sure that you just know that your support, because I didn't know that. I was very closed off about it, just because of how I was told not to disclose sometimes, just because it kept you from just being safe and being judged.
Sure.
Well, and I think we're always our own worst critics. We're always afraid of what we don't know. We're always afraid that people are going to see our vulnerabilities, our inabilities, and stuff like that. So what advice would you have to someone that has a disability now, when they are talking to their employers, when they are talking to people, about being comfortable enough to talk about that, Max?
So I feel like it's a two-way street. I think one is that the employers should be asking any candidate they have in the interview if they need accommodations, or if they have a relationship to accessibility and disability, so they can have a bit of an understanding more about that person, and see how they can help, and how they can help that person potentially if they end up joining the company. So that really shows that you're knowing that you care about your potential employee, but also that you're trying to create a workplace where everyone feels included and safe. And that would make, for example, if someone said that to me, I would feel very comfortable to disclose. On the flip side, if they don't ask that and you disclose during an interview, I think that's really important, just because it weeds out the companies that won't be a fit for you, and it'll make you. It might suck for a while, because you're not getting a job, and it's tough because people aren't seeing what you bring to the table. You just got it's a numbers game, as some people say. If you keep applying, at some point you're finding the right job for you, and that's what it will ultimately come down to. And that's what some of the advice I would give is just be open about it in those situations, because you'll find the right company that fits for you that way. And ultimately, on the other flip side, just know your rights. If someone says to you, "Oh, we can't do that for you," and it's undue hardship, you can protect yourself and get and let obviously give the company a two sense of your mind.
Definitely here in California, right, Glenn? I mean,
yes.
Or you get yourself in a lot of trouble here in California for saying anything like that. I mean, that is big no-no right now.
If we could build upon that quickly, Max, or briefly, I know from different people that I've been around before that have, say, Asperger's, or even people that are more extreme with some other of those cognitive issues, that if you can have someone like that working with you and get them that instructions, typically they have a focus that's very deep, better than maybe the average person, that can actually become a good employee. So if you were talking to an employer, give me some advice about this. What type of advice would you give them about being able to train somebody or give them the information they need? And because if they can do that, they may have an employee that's very does a good job and is a great attribute to the company if they can just find a way or understand how to give them the instructions that they need.
So that would be, obviously it goes case by case because everyone learns differently. Like that's the most important thing. Like no, it's not a cookie cutter world. It's not a linear pathway. So you have to ask the person, and that's just this is my personal opinion from my own experience. I would say ask the person how they prefer to interpret the information. Some people might want it broken down into, what's that strategy? Blocking, where it's like you do a certain amount of this per day on this amount, like, and then you do another minute on this, so that you can legitimately focus all your energy on this, knowing that you're only doing this for the part of the day. If it's writing a text or developing a PDF file, whatever it may be, that would help, because then you're showing to the person that this is how we're going to help you by chunking each segment down. It allows them to not only focus on the one thing that they're learning, but it allows them to also interpret the information without any extra pressure to know there's more coming in, and they fully digest it. Sometimes it can be through video, or it can be through like actually doing it and showing them. It just depends on what the person really prefers. And we that's why you have to give options, I feel, when you're training someone. You can't just say, okay, here's a multiple choice PowerPoint, go. Like, that's not really teaching them. Who's going to really embed and ingrain what they're learning by just having it there in front of them for them to interpret? If you're not showing them the ways to interact with it, or allowing them to interact with the material they're learning, then how is your workforce going to be strong as it can be?
It's interesting you say that. I've worked with people in the Philippines for years. So just because of a language barrier, typically when we have people come on, we create a video, we take that video and transcribe it so they have it in a text. Then I have another associate that will take that and create a PDF of it, just so you have multiple ways of doing stuff. So I think we can all learn, whether it be different languages, different abilities or whatever, to have multiple ways for them to digest that information is always valuable.
Exactly. I know when I learn the best when I'm able to listen and watch it be done. Because for me, I get both senses right there. That helps me. And if it's a small, and then if you make it into a section, like when I'm reading a book, that's, how they do chapters, and then they do small stuff like intro, and then they do this subsection. That's easier for me to digest the information, because I know I can take a break and digest the original information, and then I can go to the next part without being like, okay, there's more. No, I get the chance to breathe, and my brain is like, okay, if I want to stop, I can close the book, or can continue, because my brain is not at full capacity.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is great. I'm curious about, on a day-to-day basis, my primary is to go in and look at businesses and identify some violations architecturally. But on a day-to-day basis, when you're out just in your regular day-to-day, not necessarily in a workplace, are there some struggles that you find that you've had to adapt to, going to a grocery store, going to a business, or a restaurant? Is there anything in that arena that you find struggles with that we could train, staff when I'm out and about, that would help you with your type of disability?
Oof, that's a good question. Socially, sometimes, like in loud environments and fast pace, I won't be as interactive. I tend to shy away, because there's so much going on that I'd rather talk with people in a one-on-one manner, kind of like an introvert, because it's easier for me to communicate and be heard, and the loud noise is not affecting my cognitive load, because I can know what's going on, I can see what's going on, but it's hard for me to start a conversation in big groups like that. So I would go and focus on one-on-one, and that's just for any like a big network, any events that I would go to, or any socialization with friends. I would tend to not try to be the center of attention, because that was very hard for me to process. And another thing would be also when someone speaks very quickly. I know I had to slow down my time when I was living in France and learn not to speak quickly. For me, if someone speaks too quickly and I don't interpret all the information, that can be another stressful thing for myself. And with restaurants and any other transportation, I haven't really had an issue with that, because I haven't been really affected in those areas. But for me, when I'm driving, I'm infected, because again, too much is going on. I shouldn't be driving. It overloads my cognitive load, because I have to focus not only on the road, focus on what's going behind and what's going around me, but I have to focus on everything, like going on the car. And I've been in a bunch of small like accidents where like I clipped the car or whatever it may be, because my mind could be elsewhere and too much is on my load. So I have to not drive. I really shouldn't be driving. Even though I have my license, I haven't driven in 2 years almost.
Right. And we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And I think that when I'm out and I'm teaching a workplace, I'm always asking them to look the person, straight on and slow down your speech, make it clear, and do everything that they can so that they don't have to ask you to repeat it. But if they do, definitely don't look annoyed. You just want to repeat back to them. Sometimes they're just needing assurance, or if they're parroting back to you, give them assurance that, yeah, no, that's exactly right. And so I think that not just this type of disability, but a lot of us, look at even from our last week's, look them in the eye and assume that they can communicate with you. And if they ask you to repeat, but always clear and slow, no matter how rushed you are. And that is definitely in the restaurant business, because, they're trying to get from table to table. So making sure that they engage with everyone and repeat if they have to is something that we definitely talk about. Glenn, is there anything that you do in your world of accessibility that would help? I mean, definitely, it seems like if you've got a lot of fast moving things on the internet, this would really affect this sort of disability. Is there any requirements with any of that on your side of it?
When you come with cognitive issues, I think two things are key, and Max has kind of touched on them. I think I try and have a lot of my clients create videos about what they're doing. That way, A, you have written word, B, you have video, because not only from a learning aspect, a lot of people are lazy these days. So if you will talk to them and just give them the information like that so they can digest it, they would rather do that than reading it. And sometimes if you do have a website that's a little bit more complex, sometimes it is good to have paragraphs off different parts of the website that maybe are at a lower reading level, just so that everyone can comprehend and understand it. So I think a combination of videos and just having some lay verbiage on there. I mean, that's sometimes when we work with real technical people, it's hard to get them to understand that the rest of us aren't as technical as them. So how can we put this in a way that everyone can comprehend and absorb the information?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What grade were you when you identified, Max? What was, because I know figuring out that there is a disability early on is so important for kids these days. How old were you when you figured out, okay, there's something that's just different here?
I was born premature, 2 months, and they knew right away because my motor skills weren't fully developed. My right foot curled into my leg, And I had to wear a body brace and a foot brace to about 3 years old, 4 years old to correct it. But they knew right then there I had trouble with my motor skills. I had difficulties holding a pen and tying shoes for a long time, so I would use Velcro. And right when I hit grade 1, I was about 6, 7 years old. I remember leaving grade 1 because there was some stuff going on at home that I was dealing with, but not only at home, but it was just the class workload was too much for me. Like I walked out of class and went back to the SK. Like I told the teacher, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I want to go back to the SK. Like I said that to them right then and there. And as a 6-year-old, they brought me back, and I was a grade behind, and then they put me in transition class in grade 3, and I went from being in the transition class in grade 3 to grade 5, and then I wanted a challenge and went into normal class in grade 6, but I shouldn't have. I should have stayed in there. I just was wanting more of the challenge, and I got officially diagnosed with a learning disability in 2009.
Wow. And, now it's really up to parents to really advocate for their children today. But I know that when you do that as a parent, the success of your children can be equal to, because the main goal anymore is keeping children mainstreamed into the regular class, but pulling them out as needed when that child needs it, where the stimulus is just too much and they need a quieter environment so that they can refocus and then integrate them back into mainstream. And that has really been helpful. So I just love that you're out educating the work world about it, because it's the same thing. You've got brilliantly smart kids and young adults out there that wanting to get into the work world. And you're right, it's just a little bit of adaptation to a workspace can make the world of difference for you. And quite honestly, when you get someone with a disability and a work place will work with them, you've got a loyal, dedicated employee, because if they're going to stand up for you and help you through, you're not going to want to leave. And I think that employers really need to understand that today's world, we don't have loyal employers like we used to. I mean, people would get a job and you'd stay there forever, right? I mean, you retire out of a place. Now, people love to job hop. But if you hire a disabled person, that you've got a greater chance when you accommodate them and make them feel comfortable and confident with themselves to succeed, you're going to keep that employee, don't you think? I mean, that's the success, because the daily success at your workspace is going to make you not want to leave.
100%, and I can attest to that, because when I started working in the sports field in 2009, I had a core group of people who looked after me, and they understood my disability, but didn't realize it because I didn't disclose because I was still young. But I stuck with that core group for close to 10 years.
Yeah.
Because they knew how I operated. I felt comfortable. I didn't want to leave. I never really wanted to. Like all I wanted was to move up. I wanted to keep learning, and when I wasn't given that opportunity to keep growing, I knew it was time. But I didn't really want to leave. I didn't want to leave the people who understood and knew how to take care of me in certain situations, and to this day, like, if they contacted me for anything, I would be there, because I know how they looked after me in certain situations as well.
Yeah, well, that's a great message for our business owners, Glenn, right? I mean, we are trying to explain to them that if they help, you're going to keep an employee for a long time. Retention is huge right now.
Well, yeah, it always costs a lot more to bring on an employee than to keep an employee, to make an employee happy. And Max, one thing that Tracy and I know always talk to businesses about is being an advocate for, in the tight-knit communities, that different little subsets of disabilities are. So as you were just talking about there, can you elaborate on that? In my experience, people that are blind have little communities. People with MD have different communities. So maybe people with learning disabilities, have other people that deal with those same types of things. And when a business advocates for them or make sure that it's accessible to them, they typically share that with people in their community. Do you see that?
Yeah, because when I started this business, I had a lot of people who I didn't expect mention they had a learned disability or have a different type of disability come to me and talk to me about it. And I've gotten some email, some Instagram messages. I got some people who I just met out from walking my dog Churchill who talked to me about it. And I never would expect that, because when you're being open about something that's very personal, you attract people who understand because they go through a similar experience, but it's just not seen. And I never realized that type of impact you can have when you bring in that community. And it's happening on Clubhouse. Like, I didn't realize there's a 15% group, and I met all these awesome people who have unique experiences, and they live with a different disability, but I feel included because we understand the barriers that we face and the challenges that we face daily.
That's the club that Adriana started that we talked about a little bit last week, Tracy. I'm getting Tracy drug into Clubhouse kicking and screaming, Max, so help me.
Anytime. I love the app. I'm happy that I met so many people on that app, because it not only has it helped during the pandemic, but it just helps to know that you're not alone during what we're facing right now.
Yeah, I am so grateful. I am such an advocate for the disabled and helping businesses. And I think a lot of disabled people don't realize that there are those without a disability that are still as passionate and making sure that you're being heard and that you're being accepted into the community without discrimination, and getting really people to understand the power of loyalty and the crazy imaginations and things we would never think of. That, boy, you are really getting, when you get to know someone with a disability and the challenges, they are motivated. They do things that I wouldn't even think of doing. So it is such an inspiration. And we all need a little bit of that. And so I am always, I just feel so honored to be the voice to help that community, for sure.
So Max, if someone's watching this, maybe that has a disability, and again, we're always kind of, everyone deals with confidence issues from time to time, being afraid to let people know about it. What type of advice would you give somebody if they have a disability and they're afraid of, bringing it up, talking about things and stuff like that? Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you something off the cuff there, but when you brought that up and you kind of talked about it, I think sometimes just giving people the opportunity to say, you know what, it's okay, because we're all different. Even people that may not have technically a disability, again, they may deal with confidence issues. I've seen this for years with salespeople. I'm afraid to talk about this. Well, you're still going to know more about it typically than the average person. So just finding ways to be, comfortable in their own skin. Understanding that some people are going to accept you, some people aren't, but that happens to all of us in everyday life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I was just going to ask, can you reword that question? Because I'm just trying to process, and I'm definitely want to answer the question. I'm just trying to process. Yeah.
Just what type of advice would you give someone else that has a learning disability, any type of disability, that they're kind of ashamed of it, they want to hide it because they don't know how people will react to them?
You should just that's tricky, because for myself, I know I faced it myself with my own internalized ableism, because I've heard the world say you can't do stuff. And when you are vulnerable and saying and letting someone know that you're having difficulty, you're scared that they're going to say that to you. Mm-hmm. That fear manifests, and it eats at you, and it eats at me. That's why I work really hard, because I'm always nervous that they're going to say I'm not capable. Mm-hmm. But what is tough, and I know it's extremely tough for people who live with an invisible disability, or even living with a visible disability, is just your own psyche, and just realizing that you are capable. And if someone doesn't believe in you, it's not going to break you. You have to believe in what you can do and what you know you can do, and it's about about that your self-confidence shouldn't be dependent on someone else's validation of yourself. It should be you validating yourself. If someone doesn't believe that you can do something, go do what you know you can, and not do to prove them wrong, but do it for yourself. That's what I would say, because a lot of my motivation before, when I was told I couldn't do something, was to prove someone wrong. It was really to prove something wrong, because I didn't like being told I wasn't capable. But now what I'm doing is not to prove someone wrong, it's to make something of myself, and not only make something of myself, but help others. And that's really the most important. So I truly believe, if you listen to yourself and not listen to what the other people's words are saying about you, you can achieve what you want to achieve. That's really hard. I know how hard it can be, because I still have days where I'm like, okay, like I can't do this, or they were right about me, stuff like that. It's a constant daily struggle, and I just really recommend, honestly, just keep the belief in yourself and not to give up on yourself.
Well, one thing that I would share with people in those shoes is, you know what? None of us know everything. None of us can do everything. I mean, there are a lot of times, and people, I don't think, appreciate the fact that it's okay to ask for help. There are times when I'm out talking to people and they'll ask me something about Tracy and what they can do with the business. And I just say, listen, I don't work in that arena, but I can get someone on the phone with you that can.
Yeah.
And I think just understanding that you don't know everything, but if you can help them, get them to someone else, some other way of being able to do stuff, it's okay to say, I can't do this.
100%. I completely agree with you on that statement as well. Like, the amount of times I would send it off to someone because I couldn't deal with it is unbelievable. I've been grateful for that in those situations, because there's just some things, like you mentioned, we're not good at, that someone else has that strength.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is a great message. And I think, I absolutely agree with you, Glenn, that we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And the fear of showing someone your weakness is typically what it is. But I think for you, Max, and for so many others, you are not as different as you think. Mm-hmm. Everybody has something. Everybody has something that they're not great at. Like, you don't want me playing a lot of sports. It's just, I kind of look like Goofy out there. It's just, I'm not as coordinated. I try, I give it my best, but it's not my strength. But some people are great at that. And so I think that the big message here is that you're amazing, and that we are really all different, but that's what makes us great. And that we need to have the courage to talk about it and be okay and accept each other for our strengths and our weaknesses.
Well, and as you mentioned, Max, about, all those fears, I can't tell you how many times when I've been training or talking to a salesperson over the last 20 years, when they say, well, what if this happens? And I said, what if it doesn't? You don't know what's going to happen. So quit being afraid of what might and just let life be.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's tough for some people to get through that, because some of us, like myself, we live in our head a lot because we analyze how we interpret things differently, and that's the hard part. But you're 100% correct. It's legitimately, what's the worst that can happen? Mm-hmm. Yeah. You fail and you learn. That's the worst that can happen.
Right. And keep practicing. Keep practicing, keeping that tool in your tool belt and remembering, I can use this tool is so important, that we just got to keep practicing. I suppose if I kept practicing, maybe I'll be good at sports. Or at least I can get out there and play, right?
There you go. Well, Max, this has been awesome. We really appreciate you coming on, opening up, being vulnerable, and kind of talking about this. If anyone would want to reach out to you or contact you, what's the best mode to do that?
It would be contacting either us on LinkedIn on at Liebs&Co page, or you can go to our website at liebsandco.com and contact us at info@liebsandco.com for email, and finally on Instagram at Liebs&Co.
And that's Liebs, Liebs and Co, correct?
Yep.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, this has been great. Again, thank you for coming on, Max. We really appreciate this. I think it's been good just to kind of share, just so people can understand, because as some people without disabilities, we're afraid of what we don't know. So I think the more we can let people know about it, the more we can be a better community together.
Exactly, 100%. And we're talking about inclusivity and keeping everyone and making it an environment accessible to everyone. That's the way we do it. We work together.
Anything else, Tracy?
No, I just, again, thank you so much, Max, for joining us today and explaining to us and giving us a little more insight so that we have a better understanding on how to talk with people with your type of disability as well. It's always great to learn something new.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure talking both of you, Tracy and Glenn. I truly appreciate you allowing me to come on the show, and I truly enjoyed my time.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll see everyone here back again next week. Have a great holiday weekend, everyone.